Now, the next thing we're going to talk about this week is this idea of ministry leaders as change agents. And let's face it, none of us really likes to change. I think by design, and especially those of you who have these sort of managerial tendencies and these very conscientious tendencies, you don't like to change a whole lot. We like to keep things the same. We like to have things predictable, knowable. We like to feel like we're in charge of circumstances, right? But the reality is that life is about change. And if we're not in a changing environment, if we're not recognizing the change, rather, then we're not doing an effective job as a leader. And so change is an ever-present reality that all leaders need to know how to deal with. So hopefully this section here will help you some. Let's talk about the nature of change. It's natural. Growth is maintained through change. The alternative is institutionalization resulting in collapse. And let me just pause right there, right? A lot of churches are resistant to change, and they like to keep things the way they have always been. This is the way we've done it. This is the way we always do it. This is the way we like to do it. This is the way we're comfortable doing it. Well, guess what? The world around you is going to change, and while you're comfortable and feel secure in the way you've been doing things forever, you will become obsolete if you do not change and respond to the changes in the environment around you. Change is inevitable through intentional leader-driven change or through unintentional leadership vacuum-driven entropy. And change is necessary. Failure to embrace it due to self-perception. Change is a process. Initiators, early adopters, middle adopters, late adopters, and stragglers. So these are some of the nature ideas about the nature of change. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. You know, and consider a situation where a church is located in a certain place, right? And all of a sudden the neighborhood begins to change. The demographics of the neighborhood change. Maybe it used to be a affluent, suburban, primarily white neighborhood. And in time, it begins to change, and there's a lot more diversity in the neighborhood. There's more issues. Perhaps there's some social problems or challenges. This is not going to change. By you hunkering down and saying, well, we're just going to pretend like it's 1955, that's not going to change the nature of reality. And so you need to respond to the change around you. Or what about some of these other kind of generational changes? As time goes on, generations change, people change, their preferences change, the way they want to do church changes, right? So we have to be open and understand the best way to reach our communities. So this is all about being effective in accomplishing your mission, right? If you're not willing to change, you might not be willing to, well, I would be even stronger. You're not going to accomplish your mission if you're not willing to change and adapt to changing circumstances, right? The gospel never changes and the Lord never changes, right? But society changes, conditions change, the environment changes, and so we as leaders need to be flexible and adapt and change our organizations to fit those new realities. Okay, enough said about that. So let's talk about the types of organizational change. Well, there's gradual change. This can be small incremental changes within an existing framework. There's really no change to the mission, values, or core values. These are just kind of small tweaks, more or less. But then there's the radical change, large-scale changes, and alters the framework for the organizations. Okay, so for example, maybe changing the curriculum in the Sunday school. Small change, gradual change, maybe changing the song service. Are we going to do songs before the message, after the message? Not really organizational change. Larger changes. We're going to reorganize. We're going to hire new positions. We're going to move, the location. We're going to change something real radical like that. We are going to change the vision. We are going to change the mission. We're going to change our strategy, right? These are kind of large-scale institutional changes, and these are the ones that are challenged. Changing little things here, little tweaks, maybe there's going to be some issues, but it's these larger institutional ones that affect a lot of people and affect resources and affect territory and people's sense of possessiveness. These are the challenging ones that we have to deal with. So let's talk about the promotion and implementation of organizational change. Well, we can look at it in 3 different phases. In the first phase, we can call thawing. The idea is introduced, resistance is countered, and participants are motivated to adopt and participate. Right? So whenever you first come up with a new idea, you're always going to face some kind of resistance, right? So you introduce the idea and you're going to get the pushback, right? Well, we can't do this. We've never done this. What about this? Territorialness, all those sorts of things. We'll talk about obstacles in a bit, but this is sort of the first phase to be expected, sort of that, what's going on here? Some high tension and challenges initially. The next phase is what's called flowing, moving from the past to the future, implementation of the idea. And so this is where you actually start to actually change and do some of the things that you said you were going to do. And then there's the freezing phase. The new idea becomes the new status quo, change is implemented, and it becomes part of the new culture, how we do things around here. So eventually, in time, if you're successful with your change effort, then this will become the new normal. It'll be expected. People will know this is how we do things. We don't do it like that anymore. All right, so what are some of the challenges to change? First of all, we have to recognize resistance. We have to assess the force fields, and there's a great illustration and explanation of that in your book. I encourage you to read that force field analysis. And of course, we have to prepare for conflict. Now, there's different approaches to conflict, right? The first thing I would say is to view conflict from the positive. Now, I know in the church world we value harmony and unity and getting along and loving one another, but the reality is when it comes time for change, people are going to have different positions, right? People are not all going to be on the same page. People are going to see things differently. So as much as you are convinced or your leadership team is convinced that this is the right thing to do, this is the right way to go, you're going to find people, there's going to be people there that are going to be resistant for a variety of reasons. Remember that conflict provides an opportunity for dialogue, and that positive outcomes can come if it's managed effectively and scripturally, right? So there's going to be conflict. We'll talk a little bit more about conflict. This is a key leadership competency, is how to deal with conflict. And there's different ways that people deal with conflict, right? Some people like it, some people embrace it, some people like the discussion and dialogue. Other people are conflict averse. They don't like it at all. They don't know how to deal with it. It just challenges their self-esteem and their psyche and all these kinds of things, right? So you have to understand that different people deal with conflict differently. But you need to be prepared for it as you prepare to roll out a change initiative. So I guess that's all I want to say about change. Just remember, it's not easy, but it's necessary. And I have a tag on my email. It's a quote by a guy named Seth Godin. He says, change is a bear, but it's better than death, right? I think those are good words. If we're not changing, then we're dying. Change is about growth, and it's really the ultimate legacy a leader can leave is to have an organization, a church that's changed, that has a new culture, that's strong and healthy, it's meeting today's challenges. That's something you can be proud of, and I think that the Lord would bless. Finally today, let's talk about decision making and communication. Now, there's different types of decisions in an organization. There's the big, irreversible ones, there's the reversible ones, they're experimental, trial and error, they're made in stages, there's cautious decisions, conditional decisions, delayed decisions, right? So again, decision making happens every day, right? We're all faced with decisions. Are we going to go this way or that way? Are we going to do this thing, spend this money, not spend this money, hire these people, come up with this plan, do this outreach? Every day, decisions are part of the whoop and wharf of an organization. And as managers, you need to understand some of the nuances of decision, the types of decisions that can be made, and some processes for making decisions. So let's look at some of the steps in making decisions. Decision can be a diagnosis, right, where you're just gathering information. It can be implementation. We're actually making a change. So let's take a look at decisions as diagnosis. This requires continual spiritual preparation, where God is in the decision without attributing one side to him. And, really, I think that one of the challenges in a church setting is a leader will come in and say, well, God said, let's do this, right? God said. And, we all want to respect our pastors and leaders, but it's tough to come against God said. So I would personally, if God says something to you, then it will be confirmed by others. We shouldn't use our own sense of discernment as a kind of hatchet or a mallet that we beat people with, but be confident in God's leading in your life and still open the decision up to the same sort of process, even if you're not so sure, God said. If it's more of a diagnosis, we're still trying to figure this out. You need to clearly define the problem or issue at this stage, state the desired outcomes, gather relevant information and materials. And let me bracket right here. This is so important. Sometimes we don't do our homework. We don't really understand what all the angles are, what all the possibilities are. We just sort of like, we feel like we're in a big rush and we have to make a snap decision. As a leader, you need to step back and say, okay, let's do our homework here. Let's find out the fact. Let's gather the data, and then you can make a better, more informed decision. Collect alternative ideas, explore and debate the best alternatives, and then make the decision and formulate the policy and procedure. Okay, so this is looking at decision as diagnosis. Now the next thing is decision as implementation. Develop an implementation plan, implement the idea, assess the decision, assess the whole decision-making process. And let me bracket right there. It's always good to reflect back and say, did we really think thoroughly about that? Did we really make the best decision? Was our process good? Was it upfront? Was it above board? Did we have enough voices speaking into the process? All those kinds of things. So that's what you call kind of meta thinking, right? Meta-analysis, thinking about your thinking. This is a good, healthy leadership thing to do. Keep in mind now, decision making is not always a rational process. As much as we would like it to be a rational, okay, we're going to do these 5 steps and come up with the best decision. The reality is that there's lots of other factors. For example, things like power, concern for equity and fairness, agendas or hidden agendas, the strength of the personalities in the room. These are all part of what takes place in the decision-making process, okay? So decision-making, there's a whole science. We can have a whole class on this idea right here. But know that there's a sort of a rational approach, which I encourage you to understand and use, but also understand that there's a lot of strange, hidden, psychological power dynamics that take place in any decision-making process. And the last thing we're going to talk about here today is institutional communication. It refers to the inter-organization communication as opposed to the mass communication and marketing. Okay, so when you're talking about organizational communication, you're talking about within the organization, from leaders to subordinates to peers, within the network of people. Not the kind of communication that goes out to your congregation or out to the general public. That's an important distinction to make because those are different and they work differently and they function differently and they have different sets of challenges. It's considered the glue that holds organizations together. And think about what you do all day at work, right? You're talking to people, you're writing to people, you're having meetings. Communication is important. It keeps people together. It keeps the organization together. It works best in environments of high trust and openness. And when communication breaks down, it's usually because people stop trusting each other, they stop liking each other, there's not a culture of openness and the appreciative for different voices, right? So people don't feel appreciated, they're not going to speak up, right? When they don't speak up, what's happening? Communication is cut down. We need those voices, and as a leader, it's important for you to engender an openness and a spirit of trust, right, amongst people to have a good communication process taking place. So some things to keep in mind here. It's a process, not simply content or means of transmission. And again, sort of in our rational thinking, we like to think, okay, here's the idea. I embed the idea in writing or speaking, and boom, I put it out there and everybody receives the idea and they run with it, right? It doesn't work like that. We're not computers. This isn't a closed computer system. There's lots of things in the environment like noise, like opinions, like agendas, all those kinds of things that sort of cloud and hinder effective communication. It's not one-way but two-way experience. Problems arise as a result of divergence between desire and perceived message, right? So you might say something and people might want to hear something else, and that's what they hear, not necessarily what you said, but because communication is clouded by our perceptions, our desires, and our agendas, communication is challenging. 5 principles of organizational communication are listed in the book. Understand that there's different methods of communication, and you need to consider something about the method of communication. There's something that's called media richness, and some medias have a lot of information in them, some don't. What's a very rich communication? Face-to-face, oral, conversation, right? You can see my face, you can see my hand gestures, which I use a lot. You can hear the tone of my voice, all those kinds of things. Those convey things. A text message, An email message. This is what's called low media richness. It doesn't convey much, just a simple message. In order to be an effective communicator, you need to match the content with the type of media so that it conveys appropriately what you intend. So let me give you an example. Sometimes we need to communicate emotionally laden kinds of things, right? For example, we need to give somebody bad news. We need to kind of correct them or something like that. That shouldn't be something you do through an email, not in my opinion, because there's a lot to that people need to see in your face. They need to hear in your tone of your voice how serious it is. You know, all those kinds of things. So if you just send out an email, you have a problem with this, you did this wrong, blah, 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 you need to fix it. Wow, people are like, wow, they don't know how serious this is. They feel threatened, right? They're kind of like, you know, going a downward spiral. So bad news, communicate face to face. Good news, typically it's hard to misinterpret it. Well, I guess you can. I guess you can overinterpret it. But good news can be communicated more through writing and those kinds of things, right? So the point here, choose the appropriate medium. And I know the younger generation, it's like everything happens through text, right? I'm just going to text you. People break up now, right, through texting. Sorry, I don't want to date you anymore. You know, all right, well, maybe that works, but there's a lot of hurt feelings, right? And so it's better to match the message with the medium, all right? Enough said on that. Well, I guess that's all about all I have to say. I know I kind of ran a little bit long this week, but there was a lot of things to cover. 5 big topics we had to cover. I hope that was helpful. I have some great discussion exercises for us this week to help you process all of this, and I hope you'll find that useful as well. So blessings to you. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all online.